Moonbound Fate. Sylvain Corvin had never believed in fate, but fate had never cared for her doubts. The night she stepped foot into Black Hollow, the whispers began. The wind carried her name. The stars flickered as if they recognized her. And when she entered the ruins of the old chapel, she saw her own face painted onto the crumbling walls, beside a man with golden eyes. A shadow moved behind her, and a voice, smooth as silk, curled against her spine. "You broke the oath," he murmured. "Now you must pay the price." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Black Hollow. The tires of Sylvain Corvin's aging Volvo crunched on the gravel road, the sound a stark contrast to the hushed reverence of the surrounding woods. Black Hollow. Even the name sent a shiver down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the late October chill. She'd scoffed at the realtor's hesitant warnings, the hushed tales of local superstition.
Quaint, she'd called it.
Atmospheric. Now, with the towering pines closing in around her, the setting sun painting the sky in bruised purples and fading golds, she felt a prickle of unease. Sylvain, at 58, had seen enough of life to dismiss most things as fanciful nonsense. A career spent dissecting historical documents had taught her that most mysteries had perfectly rational explanations. Yet, here she was, drawn to this isolated corner of the world by a faded, water-stained letter found tucked inside her grandmother's antique writing desk, a desk Sylvain had inherited after her grandmother, Alara, had passed away 6 months prior. The letter, dated over a century ago, spoke of a family legacy, a hidden inheritance, and a place called Black Hollow. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was a scent that should have been comforting, grounding, but instead, it felt watchful. Sylvain pulled the car to a stop before a wrought iron gate, its intricate design twisted and corroded with age. Beyond it, a narrow lane, barely more than a path, disappeared into the deepening gloom. This was it. Corvin Manor, or what was left of it. She stepped out of the car, the silence pressing in on her. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a pregnant one, full of unspoken words, unseen things. The wind picked up, rustling through the leaves, and for a fleeting moment, Sylvain thought she heard her name, a whispered sigh carried on the breeze. She shook her head, attributing it to the long drive and the unsettling atmosphere. Sylvain was a woman built for practicality, not poetry. Her silver-streaked brown hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her sensible tweed jacket and sturdy walking shoes chosen for comfort, not style. Her face, etched with the lines of a life lived fully, if not always happily, held a quiet strength, a resilience born from years of navigating academia's subtle battles and the sharper sting of personal loss. Her marriage to Richard, a renowned historian like herself, had ended 5 years ago, not with a bang, but with the slow, agonizing whimper of fading affection and unspoken resentments. The divorce had left her feeling hollow, adrift, a feeling she'd hoped this trip, this quest for her family's past, might help alleviate. She pushed open the gate, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. The lane led her through a tunnel of overhanging branches, the last rays of sunlight filtering through in dappled patterns. Ahead, she could make out the silhouette of a house large, imposing, and undeniably derelict. Ivy clawed at its stone walls, windows were dark and empty, and a palpable sense of decay hung in the air. As she drew closer, the details became clearer. A grand, Gothic-style manor, built in a time when craftsmanship meant something, now slowly succumbing to the relentless embrace of nature. Stone gargoyles, their features eroded by time, perched on the roofline, their empty eyes seeming to follow her every move. A sense of sadness, of faded glory, permeated the very stones. Sylvain felt a strange pull, a sense of belonging mixed with a deep unease. It was as if the house itself was calling to her, whispering secrets she couldn't quite decipher. She reached the front door, a massive oak affair, studded with iron and deeply scarred. The brass knocker, shaped like a snarling wolf's head, seemed to glint in the fading light. Hesitantly, She reached out and grasped the cold metal. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a jolt of energy, like static electricity, shot up her arm. She recoiled, startled, but the feeling was gone as quickly as it had come. She glanced around, half expecting to see something, but there was only the silent woods, the watchful house, and the deepening twilight. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the stillness, heavy and resonant, like a mournful bell tolling the end of an era. The door creaked open, revealing a cavernous hallway, shrouded in shadows. The air that spilled out was cold, carrying the scent of dust, decay, and something indefinably ancient and wild. Sylvain hesitated on the threshold. The rational part of her brain screamed at her to turn back, to get in her car and drive away. But another part, a deeper, more instinctive part, urged her forward. This was her family's history. This was where she belonged. She stepped inside. The door swung shut behind her with a resounding boom, the sound echoing through the silent house, cutting her off from the world outside. The darkness swallowed her whole. Then a flicker. A single candle, burning in a sconce on the far wall, illuminated a small circle of the hallway, revealing faded wallpaper, a dusty chandelier, and a grand staircase leading up into the shadows. And, as the candle flame danced, Sylvain saw a faint glint of gold in the darkness at the top of the stairs. 2 points of golden light, watching her. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. Chapter 2. Echoes in the ruined chapel. The golden eyes vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Sylvain blinked, straining to see into the gloom at the top of the stairs. Had it been a trick of the light? A reflection? Or something else entirely? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence. She fumbled in her bag for her flashlight, her hands shaking slightly. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding thin and reedy even to her own ears. No answer. Only the creaking of the old house settling around her, a symphony of age and decay. She took a tentative step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and that lingering, indefinable wildness that she'd noticed upon entering. The candle on the wall flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. Sylvain slowly climbed the stairs, her flashlight beam sweeping across the faded grandeur of the hallway. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down at her with somber, judging eyes. Ancestors, she presumed, though their faces were obscured by layers of dust and grime. She paused before one portrait, larger than the others, its frame intricately carved with wolves and twisting vines. The painting was so damaged that the subject was almost entirely obscured, but she could just make out the glint of a silver ring on a long, slender hand. A strange sense of familiarity tugged at her. Reaching the top of the stairs, she found herself in a long corridor, lined with closed doors. Each door was made of heavy oak, their surfaces intricately carved with scenes that seemed to depict scenes of hunting, forests, and wolves. A recurring motif, she realized, feeling a growing unease. The letter from her grandmother had mentioned a chapel, a private sanctuary within the manor where the family's most important secrets were kept. Sylvain felt a pull, an intuition, guiding her towards one particular door at the end of the corridor. This one was different. It was unadorned, plain, almost hidden, as if it were meant to be overlooked. She reached out and turned the cold, iron handle. The door opened with a low groan, revealing a room bathed in the ethereal glow of the rising moon. It was a chapel, or what remained of one. The stained glass windows were shattered, their colorful fragments littering the floor like fallen jewels. The altar was cracked and crumbling, and the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and decaying wood. But it was the walls that drew Sylvain's attention. They were covered in murals, faded and damaged, but still visible in the moonlight. Scenes of ancient rituals, of men and women dancing beneath a full moon, of wolves running through moonlit forests, and then she saw it. A section of the mural, miraculously preserved, depicted a woman standing before a towering oak tree. The woman's face, it was her face. Sylvain stared, transfixed, her breath caught in her throat. The resemblance was uncanny, undeniable. The same high cheekbones, the same determined chin, the same slightly tilted, almond-shaped eyes. Even the way her hair, depicted as a cascade of dark waves, fell around her shoulders was eerily familiar. Beside the woman in the mural stood a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his features obscured by shadow, except for his eyes. Golden eyes, piercing and intense, that seemed to glow with an inner light. The same eyes she had seen, or thought she had seen, at the top of the stairs. Sylvain reached out and touched the wall, her fingers tracing the outline of the woman's face. The stone was cold beneath her fingertips, yet she felt a strange warmth spreading through her, a connection to this place, to this image, that defied logic. A shadow moved behind her. Sylvain whirled around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing in the doorway was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette framed against the moonlight filtering through the broken windows. He was dressed in dark clothing that blended seamlessly with the shadows, but she could see his eyes. Golden eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light, fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. He stepped into the chapel, his movements silent and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. The moonlight illuminated his face, revealing sharp cheekbones, a strong jawline shadowed by a day's growth of beard, and a mouth that was both sensual and dangerous. He was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, untamed way, but there was something about him, something in his eyes, that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. "You broke the oath," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with an undercurrent of steel. It curled around her, filling the small chapel, resonating with a power that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "Now you must pay the price." His words sent a jolt of fear and confusion through her. Sylvain took a step back. I don't understand. What oath? What price?" The floor vanished beneath her feet. Chapter 3. The Man with Golden Eyes. Sylvain gasped, expecting to crash onto the stone floor, but instead, she felt a strong arm wrap around her waist, preventing her fall. She looked up, startled, into the golden eyes of the man who had just spoken those chilling words. He held her effortlessly, his grip firm but not painful. His face was close to hers, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek, smell the faint scent of pine, and something wilder, something animalistic. "Careful," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "The floor in here isn't as stable as it looks. Centuries of neglect will do that." He helped her regain her balance, but he didn't release her. They stood there, locked in a strange, intimate tableau, the moonlight casting long shadows around them. Sylvain's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and something else. A strange, unfamiliar stirring that she couldn't quite name. Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face, as if looking for something he couldn't quite find. "You truly don't know?" he asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Sylvain shook her head. "I came here because of a letter from my grandmother. It spoke of a family legacy, a place called Black Hollow." He released her, stepping back slightly, but his eyes never left hers. "Alara," he said, the name a soft sigh on his lips. "She never told you, did she?" "Told me what?" Sylvain felt a growing frustration, a sense of being caught in a play where she didn't know the lines. "Please, just tell me what's going on. What oath are you talking about?" He turned away from her, walking towards the shattered remains of the stained glass window. He looked out at the moonlit forest, his silhouette framed against the silvery light. "The Corvins," he said, his voice low and laced with a hint of sadness. "They made a pact generations ago. A pact with the guardians of this land." "Guardians?" Sylvain frowned. "What kind of guardians?" He turned back to her, his golden eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The ones who walk between worlds, he said. The ones who shift with the moon. Sylvain felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the local legends, the whispers of strange creatures that roamed the woods around Black Hollow. She dismissed them as folklore, as the product of overactive imaginations. But now, standing in this ruined chapel, with this enigmatic man and his cryptic words, she wasn't so sure. Werewolves, she said the word, the disbelief heavy in her own voice. He gave a slight nod. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. It did not reassure her. Among other things, this land is sacred. It's a place of power. And the Corvins were entrusted with its protection. And the oath. Sylvain pressed, her mind struggling to reconcile the rational world she knew with the fantastical one he was presenting. The oath was a bond, he said, his voice hardening. A promise to protect this place, to honor the ancient ways, to share the burden. He looked directly at her then. The intensity returned. A bond sealed with blood, and with a union. Sylvain's eyes widened. She looked back at the mural, at the woman who looked so much like her, standing beside the man with the golden eyes. A sudden, horrifying realization dawned on her. The woman in the mural, she was supposed to marry one of you? He nodded.
She was.
She was meant to be my bride. But she didn't, Sylvain said, her voice trembling. My grandmother she left. She ran away. She betrayed the oath, he said, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. She broke the bond. And now the debt is due. But that was generations ago. Sylvain protested. Why me? Why now? He stepped closer to her, his presence filling the small chapel. Because the bloodline continues, he said. Because the magic it calls to you. It recognizes you. You are the last of the Corvin line, Sylvain. And you are bound to this place, whether you like it or not. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but it sent a shiver through her, a mixture of fear and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to desire. My name, he said, his voice a low murmur, is Reese. A floorboard creaked loudly in the hallway. Reese's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. He released her, instantly alert, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Someone's here, he whispered. Someone who shouldn't be. He stared at her, golden eyes serious and foreboding. Chapter 4. A pact sealed in starlight. Reese moved with a swiftness that belied his size, pulling Sylvain behind the crumbling remains of the altar. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. The air in the chapel, already thick with tension, crackled with a new kind of energy, a predatory awareness. Sylvain's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath caught in her throat. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Who is it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Reese didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the doorway. His hand tightened around hers, a silent reassurance that was both comforting and terrifying. He was a creature of the shadows, of the wild, and she was caught in his world, a world she didn't understand, a world where the rules were different, and the stakes were impossibly high. The footsteps stopped just outside the chapel door. A moment of silence, stretched taut and heavy, then a voice, rough and gravelly, called out. Reese? You in there? I know you're hiding something. Reese's grip tightened on Sylvain's hand. He didn't speak, didn't move. The tension in his body was palpable, a coiled spring ready to unleash. Sylvain could feel the subtle tremor in his hand, a vibration of barely controlled power. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a man, older than Reese, with a weathered face and a stocky build. He was dressed in hunting gear, a rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the ruined chapel. I saw the car, the man said, his voice laced with suspicion. Thought I'd find you lurking around here. Up to your old tricks, are you? Reese stepped out from behind the altar, his movements smooth and controlled. He stood between Sylvain and the intruder, shielding her from view. Elias, he said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. What a pleasant surprise. What brings you to my family's property? Elias snorted. Don't play innocent with me, Reese. You know why I'm here. There's been talk, rumors, about the Corvin woman returning. Sylvain felt a jolt of fear. How did he know? Who had been talking? Reese remained impassive. Rumors are just that, Elias. Rumors. You should know better than to listen to idle gossip. Elias took a step closer, his eyes narrowed. I saw her car, Reese. A Volvo. Without estate plates.
Don't lie to me.
And if there is a visitor? Reese said, his voice dangerously low. What concern is it of yours? This land, Elias said, his voice rising in anger. It's cursed. You and your kind are a blight on it. And the Corvins, they were part of it. They brought the curse here. The Corvins were guardians of this land, Reese retorted, his golden eyes flashing. They protected it from people like you. Protected it? Elias laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. They made a deal with the devil. And now, the devil's come to collect. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Reese. I'm here to end it. To finish what should have been done generations ago. Sylvain gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She tried to step forward, to say something, but Reese held her back, his grip like iron. Don't be a fool, Elias, Reese said, his voice calm, despite the rifle pointed at his chest. You don't understand the forces at play here. I understand enough, Elias said, his finger tightening on the trigger. I understand that you and your kind need to be eradicated. Before Elias could pull the trigger, Reese moved. With a speed that Sylvain could barely comprehend, he lunged forward, knocking the rifle out of Elias's hands. The two men grappled, a whirlwind of motion and fury. Sylvain watched in horror, her mind reeling. The fight was brutal, a clash of ancient enemies. Reese, despite his seemingly effortless grace, was clearly holding back, trying to disarm Elias without seriously injuring him. But Elias was fueled by a lifetime of hatred and fear, fighting with a desperate, reckless abandon. Suddenly, Elias managed to land a blow, sending Reese staggering back. He scrambled for the fallen rifle, his eyes filled with a wild, triumphant gleam.
No.
Sylvain screamed, breaking free from Reese's hold. She ran towards Elias, desperate to stop him. Reese roared, a sound that was both human and animal, filled with rage and protectiveness. He launched himself at Elias, tackling him to the ground just as he raised the rifle. The two men struggled, the rifle discharging with a deafening blast. The bullet went wild. Sylvain watched in terrified slow motion as Reese's body went rigid and he went crashing backward with a terrible cry. Chapter 5. The Curse of Corvin Blood. Sylvain screamed again, a raw, primal sound torn from the depths of her being. She rushed to Reese's side, dropping to her knees beside him. He lay on the cold stone floor, his body unnaturally still, his golden eyes closed. A dark stain was spreading across his shirt, staining the fabric a crimson red. Reese.
No.
She cried, her voice choked with sobs. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood, her mind racing, desperate to remember the first aid training she'd taken years ago. Elias, stunned by what he'd done, stared at the scene in horror. He dropped the rifle, his hands shaking. I didn't mean, he stammered, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and regret. Sylvain ignored him, her entire focus on Reese. His breathing was shallow, ragged, his skin pale and clammy. She could feel his life force ebbing away, like sand slipping through her fingers. Stay with me, Reese, she pleaded, her voice trembling.
Please stay with me.
She looked around the ruined chapel, desperate for something, anything, that could help. Her gaze fell upon the mural, upon the image of the woman who looked so much like her, standing beside the man with the golden eyes. The oath, the bond, the curse, an idea, desperate and illogical, sparked in her mind. The letter from her grandmother, the one that had brought her to Black Hollow, had spoken of a family legacy, a hidden power. A power that flowed through the Corvin bloodline. a power that could heal or destroy. Sylvain closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She focused on the image of the mural, on the connection she felt to this place, to this man. She reached deep inside herself, searching for something, anything, that could help. She felt a strange, tingling sensation, a warmth spreading through her veins, like a fire igniting within her. It was a feeling she'd never experienced before, a sense of power, of connection to something ancient and primal. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Rhys's wound. She placed her hands, still stained with his blood, over the injured area. She didn't know what she was doing, what she was expecting, but she poured all her will, all her desperation, all her love, into that touch. "Heal," she whispered, the word a prayer, a command, a desperate plea. "Please heal." A faint golden glow emanated from her hands, a warm, pulsating light that seemed to seep into Rhys's wound. Sylvain felt a surge of energy drain from her, leaving her weak and dizzy, but she held on, her focus unwavering. Slowly, miraculously, the bleeding began to stop. The ragged edges of the wound started to knit together, the torn flesh mending itself before her very eyes. Rhys's breathing grew stronger, his color returning. Sylvain watched in disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. She was a woman of science, of logic, of reason. Yet, here she was, witnessing something that defied all explanation, something that belonged in the realm of myth and legend. Finally, the wound was completely healed, leaving only a faint, silvery scar. Rhys's eyes fluttered open, his golden gaze focusing on her with a mixture of confusion and wonder. "Sylvain?" he whispered, his voice weak but clear. What happened?" She collapsed against him, relief washing over her in a tidal wave. She buried her face in his chest, her body shaking with sobs of relief. "You were shot," she said, her voice muffled. "I thought I'd lost you." He gently stroked her hair, his hand surprisingly strong. "You saved me," he said, his voice filled with awe.
"You healed me."
Sylvain pulled back, looking at him, her eyes wide with disbelief.
"I don't understand," she said. "How did I do that?"
Rhys smiled, a weak but genuine smile.
"The Corvin blood," he said.
"It's stronger than you know. The oath it changed your ancestors. Gave them gifts. Cursed them as well." He struggled to sit up, and Sylvain helped him, supporting his weight. He looked at Elias, who was still standing there, frozen in shock. "Go," Rhys said, his voice weary. "Leave this place, and never come back." Elias, after a moment of conflict, quickly scrambled out and away. Rhys looked at Sylvain, a deep question in his golden eyes. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past return. Elias's hasty departure left a heavy silence in the chapel, broken only by the ragged breaths of Sylvain and Rhys. The moonlight, streaming through the shattered windows, painted the scene in shades of silver and shadow, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and the lingering scent of gunpowder. Sylvain sat beside Rhys, her hand still resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, a reassuring rhythm that calmed her own racing pulse. "I need to understand," Sylvain said, her voice still trembling slightly. "That power, it came from me? From the Corvin bloodline?" Rhys nodded, his golden eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "The oath your ancestors made, it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a binding agreement, a merging of their essence with the spirit of this land. It changed them, gave them abilities beyond those of ordinary humans." "Abilities like healing?" Sylvain asked, remembering the warmth that had flowed through her, the golden glow that had emanated from her hands. "Healing is one of them," Rhys confirmed. "There are others. Strength, speed, heightened senses, and the ability to shift." Sylvain's eyes widened.
"Shift?"
she repeated, the word echoing the local legends she dismissed as folklore. Rhys hesitated, as if reluctant to reveal too much. "To take the form of a wolf," he said softly. "It's a gift and a curse. It's a part of who we are." Sylvain stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the rational world she knew with the fantastical reality he was presenting. She, a historian, a woman of science and logic, was descended from a line of people who could transform into wolves? It was preposterous. And yet, she had just healed a gunshot wound with her bare hands. But why did my grandmother leave? Sylvain asked, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and a growing sense of betrayal. Why did she break the oath? Rhys looked away, his gaze drifting towards the mural, towards the image of the woman who looked so much like Sylvain. Alara, she was strong-willed, independent. She didn't want to be bound by ancient traditions, by a destiny she hadn't chosen. She fell in love with an outsider, a man who knew nothing of our world. She chose him over the oath, over me. Sylvain heard the pain in his voice, the echo of a centuries-old heartbreak. She felt a pang of sympathy for him, for this man who had been waiting for a bride who would never come. But if the oath was broken, Sylvain said, why didn't the consequences happen sooner? Why wait until now? The magic it ebbs and flows, Rhys explained. It lies dormant for years, sometimes generations, and then it awakens. And when it does, it seeks to fulfill the terms of the original agreement. It seeks a Corvin and a guardian. And that's why you're here, Sylvain said, her voice barely a whisper. Because you're still bound by that oath. Rhys nodded. I am the last of my line, just as you are the last of yours. The magic it brought you here, Sylvain. It drew you to Black Hollow. To me. Sylvain felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea that she was being manipulated by some unseen force, by an ancient magic she didn't understand, was terrifying. And yet, there was also a strange sense of inevitability. As if she had been destined to come here, to meet Rhys, to confront her family's past.
What happens now?
She asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Now, he said, we face the consequences together. A sudden noise from outside the chapel startled them both. A twig snapping, the rustle of leaves. Someone was out there. Rhys tensed, his senses instantly alert. Stay here, he whispered, rising to his feet with a fluid grace that belied his recent injury. I'll see who it is. He moved towards the doorway, his body a silhouette against the moonlight. Sylvain watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a sense of dread, a premonition of danger. The shadows of the past were returning, and they were not alone. A low growl, unmistakably Lupin, ripped through the night air, followed by a chilling human scream. Chapter 7. The hunt begins anew. The scream cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Sylvain scrambled to her feet, fear clawing at her throat. She rushed to the doorway, peering out into the moonlit darkness. She could see nothing but the swaying branches of the trees, the shadows dancing in the wind. Rhys, she called out, her voice trembling. Rhys, what was that? There was no answer. Only the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl in the distance, and the frantic beating of her own heart. Sylvain hesitated, torn between her fear and her desperate need to know what had happened. She couldn't just stand there, waiting. Rhys could be in danger. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She stepped out of the chapel, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of pine, and something else. Something metallic, coppery, the scent of blood. She followed the sound of the growl, her footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. The path led her deeper into the woods, towards a clearing bathed in the silvery light of the full moon. And then she saw him. Rhys stood in the center of the clearing, his body transformed. He was no longer the man she had met in the chapel. He was a wolf, a magnificent creature of silver and shadow, his fur gleaming in the moonlight, his golden eyes burning with a fierce, primal intensity. He was facing another wolf, larger, darker, its fur a mottled black and gray. The two creatures circled each other, growling, their teeth bared, their bodies tense and ready to strike. Sylvain watched in horror, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. This was the reality of Rhys's world, A world of ancient magic, of shapeshifters, of primal instincts and deadly conflicts. The dark wolf lunged, snapping at Rhys's throat. Rhys dodged, his movements fluid and graceful, countering with a snap of his own. The two wolves clashed, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws. Sylvain realized that the dark wolf was the aggressor, its attacks relentless and brutal. Rhys was on the defensive, trying to protect himself without seriously injuring his opponent. She remembered what Rhys had said about Elias, about his hatred and fear of the werewolves, his desire to eradicate them. Could this dark wolf be connected to Elias? Was this another hunter, come to finish what Elias had started? She knew she had to do something to help Rhys. But what could she do? She was just a woman, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a newfound, untested power. She remembered the healing, the golden glow that had emanated from her hands. Could she use that power again? Could she use it to defend Rhys? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, focusing on the connection she felt to Rhys, to the magic that flowed through her veins. She felt the familiar tingling sensation, the warmth spreading through her, building in intensity. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the dark wolf. She raised her hands, palms outstretched, channeling all her will, all her energy, towards the creature. "Stop," she commanded, her voice ringing out in the clearing, amplified by the power that surged through her. A wave of golden energy erupted from her hands, striking the dark wolf with a force that sent it tumbling backwards. The wolf yelped, its body convulsing, its eyes widening in surprise and pain. Rhys, startled by the sudden intervention, turned to look at Sylvain, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. The dark wolf scrambled to its feet, shaking its head, its eyes burning with rage. It snarled at Sylvain, its fangs bared, its body tensing to attack. But before it could move, Rhys stepped in front of Sylvain, shielding her from the creature's wrath. Rhys, in his wolf form, barked a sharp command, and to Sylvain's astonishment, the black wolf stilled, then lowered its head in a gesture of clear submission. It turned and fled away, disappearing into the darkness. Rhys watched it go, then turned back to Sylvain, his gaze filled with questions. He began to shift, the magnificent lupin form shrinking, changing, reforming into the man she knew. He stood before her, naked and vulnerable, and yet still radiating that aura of power and ancient magic. What was that?" Sylvain asked, her voice still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Who was that wolf?" Rhys looked down at himself, and with a flick of thought, his clothes, which he'd shed before transforming, reappeared. "One of Elias's pack," he said, his voice grim. "They've been hunting us for generations. They believe we're a threat, a curse on this land." He looked back, deep concern etched into his features. "The hunt," he said, "has begun anew." Chapter 8. Secrets Unveiled by Moonlight. Rhys dressed quickly, his movements efficient and practiced, as if this were a scenario he'd faced many times before. He retrieved Sylvain's flashlight, which she had dropped in the chaos, and handed it back to her, his fingers brushing hers. The brief contact sent a jolt of warmth through her, a strange counterpoint to the chilling fear that still lingered in the air. "We need to go," he said, his voice urgent. "It's not safe here." He led her back through the woods, moving with a swift, silent grace that she struggled to match. The moon, now high in the sky, cast long, dancing shadows around them, making the familiar wood seem alien and menacing. Sylvain stumbled over roots and rocks, her mind still reeling from what she had just witnessed. They reached the manor, its dark, imposing silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. The front door, which Sylvain had left open in her haste, stood ajar, a silent invitation to the darkness within. Rhys hesitated on the threshold, his senses alert. He sniffed the air, his golden eyes scanning the shadows. "It's clear," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. They stepped inside, the heavy oak door closing behind them with a resounding boom that echoed through the silent house. Rhys lit a few more candles, their flickering flames casting a warm, inviting glow that pushed back the darkness, but did little to dispel the sense of unease. "We need to talk," Sylvain said, her voice echoing in the cavernous hallway. "I need to understand everything. About the oath, about the Corvins, about you." Rhys nodded, leading her towards a large, dusty library. The room was filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, crammed with ancient tomes and leather-bound volumes. A large fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. A single, worn armchair sat before it, bathed in the warm glow of a nearby candle. Rhys gestured for Sylvain to sit, while he remained standing, his back to the fireplace, his golden eyes fixed on her. He began to speak, his voice low and measured, recounting a tale that spanned centuries, a tale of magic, betrayal, and forbidden love. "The Corvins," he said, "were not originally from this land. They came from Europe, centuries ago, fleeing persecution. They were different. They possessed abilities, powers that set them apart from ordinary humans. They were drawn to this place, to Black Hollow, because of its energy, its connection to the otherworld." "The otherworld?" Sylvain asked, her brow furrowed. "The realm of spirits, of magic," Rhys explained. "A place that exists alongside our own, separated by a thin veil. This land, it's a gateway, a place where the veil is weak, where the two worlds can intersect. And the Corvins, they made a pact with the beings of this otherworld?" Sylvain prompted, trying to piece together the fragments of the story. "With the guardians of this land," Rhys corrected. "With the werewolves, who were the protectors of this gateway. The oath was a promise of mutual respect, of cooperation. The Corvins would use their knowledge, their magic, to help maintain the balance between the worlds, and the werewolves would protect them, would share their strength and their connection to the land." "And the Union?" Sylvain asked, her gaze dropping to the floor, remembering the image in the mural, the woman who looked so much like her, standing beside the man with the golden eyes. "The marriage?" Rhys's voice softened.
"It was a way to seal the bond," he said.
"To create a lasting connection between the two families, between the human and the wolf. It was meant to be a symbol of unity, of trust." "But Alara, she refused," Sylvain said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "She fell in love with a man who knew nothing of our world," Rhys said, his voice laced with a hint of bitterness. "She chose him over the oath, over her duty, over me. She ran away, taking with her the secrets of the Corvins, leaving the bond broken, the gateway vulnerable. And now the magic is awakening," Sylvain said, her voice barely a whisper. "And it's seeking to restore the balance, to fulfill the terms of the original agreement." Rhys nodded. "The magic, it calls to you, Sylvain. It recognizes you as the heir to the Corvin legacy. And it calls to me as the chosen one. But what does it want?" Sylvain asked, her voice filled with fear and uncertainty. "What does it expect us to do?" Before Rhys could answer, there was sudden shattering of glass from upstairs. Then a howl. Not Rhys's. Chapter 9. A dance of trust and deceit. The howl echoed through the manor, a chilling sound that sent a fresh wave of fear through Sylvain. Rhys's head snapped up, his golden eyes instantly alert, his body tensing like a coiled spring. He moved with a swiftness that belied his human form, reaching the doorway in a few long strides. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "And don't make a sound." He disappeared up the grand staircase, his footsteps silent on the worn wooden treads. Sylvain hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to follow him, to help, but she knew she would only be a hindrance. She was still learning to control her newfound power, still struggling to understand the rules of this dangerous, magical world. She waited in the library, the silence pressing in on her, broken only by the crackling of the candles and the frantic beating of her own heart. She paced back and forth, her mind racing, imagining all sorts of horrors. Was it Elias's pack again? Had they found a way into the manor? Or was it something else, something even more dangerous? Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence became unbearable, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Sylvain could stand it no longer. She had to know what was happening. She crept towards the staircase, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She climbed the stairs slowly, cautiously, her senses on high alert. The air was heavy, thick with a scent of dust, old wood, and something else. Something wild, animalistic, the scent of wolf. She reached the landing, her flashlight beam sweeping across the long corridor lined with closed doors. The shattered remains of a window lay scattered across the floor, glinting in the moonlight. The howling had come from this direction. She followed the trail of broken glass, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached a door that stood slightly ajar, a sliver of moonlight illuminating the darkness within. She could hear sounds coming from inside, the sounds of a struggle, of growls and snarls and human voices. She pushed the door open slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. And then she saw it. Rhys was wrestling with another werewolf, but this one was different from the one in the clearing. This wolf was smaller, leaner, its fur a reddish-brown. And as Sylvain watched, the wolf began to shift, its form changing, shrinking, reforming into a woman. A young woman, no older than 20, with fiery red hair and fierce green eyes. She was dressed in ragged clothing, her body bruised and battered, but her gaze was defiant, her expression filled with a mixture of anger and fear. Rhys pinned her to the ground, his hands holding her wrists, his golden eyes blazing with fury.
"Who are you?"
he demanded, his voice a low growl. "And what are you doing here?" The woman struggled against his grip, her green eyes flashing. "Let me go," she spat. "I don't have to answer to you." "You broke into my home," Rhys retorted. "You attacked me. You have a lot to answer for." Sylvain stepped into the room, her flashlight beam illuminating the scene. "Rhys," she said, her voice trembling.
"Who is she?"
Rhys turned to look at Sylvain, his expression softening slightly.
"I don't know," he said.
"But she's one of them. A werewolf." The woman's gaze shifted to Sylvain, her green eyes widening in surprise. "You," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. "You're the Corvin woman." Sylvain felt a jolt of recognition. The woman's red hair, her green eyes, they were familiar. She had seen them before in the mural in the chapel. The woman standing beside the man with the golden eyes, the woman who was supposed to be Rhys's bride, Alara. "You look like her," Sylvain said, her voice barely a whisper. "Like my grandmother." The woman's expression hardened. "Alara was a traitor," she said, her voice filled with bitterness. "She abandoned her duty. She betrayed her people." "She fell in love," Sylvain retorted, defending her grandmother. "She chose her own path. And in doing so, she cursed us all," the woman said, her voice rising in anger. "She left the gateway vulnerable. She broke the bond. And now we're all paying the price." "What price?" Sylvain asked, her mind racing. "What are you talking about?" The woman looked at Rhys, her green eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Tell her," she said. "Tell her the truth." Rhys hesitated, his gaze shifting between Sylvain and the woman. He looked torn, conflicted, as if he were struggling with a difficult decision. He finally met Sylvain's gaze. "Her name," Rhys said, his voice heavy with a burden Sylvain couldn't yet comprehend, "is Lyra. And she's my sister." A sister he had never, to Sylvain's knowledge, mentioned before. Chapter 10. The Price of Forbidden Love. Sylvain stared at Rhys, then at Lyra, her mind reeling. Sister? Rhys had a sister? He had never mentioned her, never even hinted at her existence. A wave of betrayal washed over her, mingling with the confusion and fear that already churned within her. "Your sister?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But how?" Rhys looked away, his jaw tight, his golden eyes clouded with a pain she couldn't understand. "It's a long story," he said, his voice evasive. "A story I think I deserve to hear," Sylvain retorted, her voice gaining strength. "After everything that's happened, after everything you've told me, I deserve the truth." Lyra, still pinned to the ground by Rhys, spoke up, her voice filled with a desperate urgency.
"He's protecting you, Sylvain."
"He's trying to shield you from the truth." And what is the truth? Sylvain asked, her gaze shifting between Rhys and Lyra. Lyra looked at Rhys, her green eyes pleading. Tell her about the prophecy, she said. Tell her about the curse. Rhys closed his eyes, his body tensing, as if he were bracing himself for a blow. He released Lyra, stepping back from her, allowing her to sit up. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. There's an ancient prophecy, he began, his voice low and heavy. A prophecy that foretold the breaking of the oath, the consequences that would follow. And what are those consequences? Sylvain prompted, her heart pounding in her chest. The prophecy speaks of a schism, Rhys said, his voice hesitant. A division within the werewolf clans, a war between those who want to maintain the balance and those who want to exploit the power of the gateway. And Lyra, she's on the other side? Sylvain asked, her gaze shifting to the young woman. Lyra nodded, her green eyes filled with a fierce determination. I believe in protecting the balance, she said. But there are others, led by my father, who believe that the Corvins are the key to unlocking even greater power. They believe that by forcing you to fulfill the original oath, they can control the gateway, control the otherworld. Sylvain felt a chill run down her spine. Forcing me? She repeated. What do you mean? They want you to marry Rhys, Lyra said, her voice blunt. To complete the union that Alara refused. They believe that will give them the power they seek. Sylvain stared at Rhys, her mind reeling. Was that what he wanted? Was that why he had brought her here? Why he had told her about the oath, about the magic? Was he just using her, manipulating her to fulfill some ancient prophecy? Is that true, Rhys? She asked, her voice trembling. Is that what you want? Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else. Something that looked like regret. I want to protect you, Sylvain, he said. I want to keep you safe. But I have a duty to my people, to the balance.
So, you would force me to marry you?
Sylvain asked, her voice rising in anger. You would use me to fulfill some ancient prophecy, to appease some magical force I don't even understand? It's not that simple, Rhys said, his voice pleading. The prophecy, it's not just about marriage. It's about a choice. A choice that only you can make. What choice? Sylvain demanded. The prophecy speaks of 2 paths, Rhys explained. One path leads to balance, to harmony between the worlds. The other leads to chaos, to destruction. And my choice determines which path we take. Sylvain asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys nodded. The prophecy says that the last of the Corvin line will have the power to either heal the rift or shatter the veil completely. And what if I refuse? Sylvain asked, her voice filled with defiance. What if I choose neither path? Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a deep sadness. Then the prophecy will remain unfulfilled, he said. And the balance will be lost forever. He turned and walked away, leaving Sylvain feeling utterly alone, to face the terrifying decision placed before her. The weight of the world pressed down on Sylvain. Chapter 11. Scars of the Soul Bond. Sylvain watched Rhys walk away, the heavy silence of the manor pressing down on her. The weight of his words, of the prophecy, of the impossible choice she faced, felt crushing. She felt betrayed, manipulated, and utterly alone. Lyra, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of sadness and understanding, spoke up, her voice soft. He's not your enemy, Sylvain, she said. He's just caught in a web of duty and destiny, just like you. Sylvain turned to Lyra, her anger still simmering beneath the surface. Easy for you to say, she retorted. You're one of them. You understand this world, this magic. I'm just an outsider, a pawn in your ancient game. Lyra shook her head. I may be a werewolf, she said, but I don't agree with what my father is doing. I don't believe in forcing anyone, in using power for selfish gain. That's why I came here, to warn Rhys, to try to find a different way. Sylvain studied Lyra, trying to discern the truth in her words. There was a sincerity in her green eyes, a vulnerability that belied her fierce exterior. And there was also that undeniable resemblance to Alara, to Sylvain herself. A connection, however tenuous, that she couldn't ignore. "Why should I trust you?" Sylvain asked, her voice still laced with suspicion. Lyra sighed. "I know I have no reason to expect your trust," she said. "But I'm offering you the truth, the whole truth, not just the parts that Rhys wants you to hear." She paused, then continued, her voice hesitant. "There's more to the prophecy, Sylvain. Something Rhys hasn't told you." "What is it?" Sylvain asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "The prophecy speaks of a soul bond," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "A connection between the Corvin woman and the chosen werewolf, a bond that goes beyond marriage, beyond physical attraction. It's a merging of souls, a sharing of power and of pain." Sylvain felt a shiver run down her spine. A soul bond? The idea was both terrifying and strangely alluring. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means that your fates are intertwined," Lyra explained. "That your emotions, your thoughts, your very beings are connected. It means that you can feel each other's pain, share each other's strength, and that if one of you dies, the other will likely follow." Sylvain stared at Lyra, her mind reeling. A soul bond, it explained the strange connection she felt to Rhys, the pull, the attraction that defied logic and reason. It explained the way she had been able to heal him, the way she had sensed his danger. But if the oath was broken, Sylvain said, how can this soul bond still exist? It was weakened, fragmented, Lyra said, but not completely severed. The magic, it still lingers, waiting to be rekindled. And your arrival, your presence here in Black Hollow, it's awakened the bond, strengthened the connection. Sylvain felt a wave of dizziness, of disorientation. She reached out and grabbed the back of a nearby chair, steadying herself. The room seemed to spin around her, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She felt a strange pressure in her chest, a tightness, a pulling sensation. It was as if something were trying to connect with her, to reach out to her from across a vast distance. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to a small, dusty mirror hanging on the wall. She looked at her reflection, at her own face, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something else. A flicker of gold in her eyes, a hint of a wolfish grin on her lips, a shadow of another presence within her. She gasped, stepping back from the mirror, her hand flying to her mouth. She felt a sudden surge of pain, a sharp, stabbing sensation in her chest, as if someone had plunged a knife into her heart. She cried out, clutching her chest, her body convulsing. She heard Lyra shout her name, felt the young woman's hands on her arms, trying to steady her. But the pain was too intense, too overwhelming. She collapsed to the floor, her vision blurring, her consciousness fading. She saw a vision of Rhys, his face contorted in agony, his body covered in blood. He was fighting, struggling against a shadowy figure, a figure that emanated darkness and malice. And then, everything went black. In the silence of her collapse, she heard a voice, his voice. Rhys's voice. Sylvain. Chapter 12. The Gathering Storm Within. Sylvain awoke to the sensation of warmth, of a strong, steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. She was lying on a soft surface, covered in a thick, woolen blanket. She opened her eyes, blinking, her vision blurry. She saw Rhys's face above her, his golden eyes filled with concern. "Sylvain," he said, his voice a low rumble, relief evident in his tone. "You're awake. How do you feel?" She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she fell back against the pillows. She realized she was in a bed, in a large, dimly lit room she didn't recognize. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and a fire crackled merrily in a large stone fireplace, casting a warm, inviting glow. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You collapsed," Rhys said. "Lyra said it was the soul bond that you were experiencing my pain." Sylvain remembered the vision, the image of Rhys fighting, covered in blood. "You were hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "What happened?" Rhys hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. It was my father, he said, his voice low and bitter. He attacked me. He wants to force you to fulfill the prophecy. And Lyra? Sylvain asked. Where is she? She's gone, Rhys said. She helped me, she fought by my side. But she knew she couldn't stay. She's going to try to rally those who oppose my father to try to stop him. Sylvain felt a surge of guilt, of regret. She had mistrusted Lyra, had accused her of being part of the plot. But the young woman had risked her life to help Rhys, to warn them. I misjudged her, Sylvain said, her voice filled with remorse. Rhys nodded, his expression understanding. It's not your fault, he said. This world, it's confusing, dangerous. Trust is a precious commodity. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch sent a shiver through her, a familiar warmth that spread through her veins, easing the lingering pain in her chest. The soul bond, Sylvain said, her voice barely a whisper. It's stronger now, isn't it? Rhys nodded. Your presence here, your acceptance of your power, it's awakened the bond, strengthened the connection between us. And that vision, Sylvain began. It was real, he confirmed. I felt you too. Your fear. Your determination to help. Sylvain felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, confusion, and something else. A sense of connection, of belonging, of intimacy. The soul bond, this invisible thread that linked her to Rhys, was both terrifying and strangely comforting. What do we do now? She asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a deep resolve. We fight, he said. We fight for our freedom, for the balance, for the future. He stood up, walking towards the window. He looked out at the moonlit forest, his silhouette framed against the silvery light. My father, he's gathering his forces, he said. He's planning to attack, to force you to comply with the prophecy. And what about the prophecy? Sylvain asked. The choice, the two paths? Rhys turned back to her, his expression grim. I don't know, he said. I don't know which path is the right one. I don't know if I can trust the prophecy, if I can trust my own instincts. He walked back to the bed, sitting down beside her. He took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. But I know this, he said, his voice filled with a fierce determination. I will not let my father harm you. I will not let him force you to do anything against your will. I will protect you, Sylvain, with my life. Sylvain looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She saw the truth in his eyes, the sincerity in his words. He was a warrior, a protector, a man bound by duty and destiny. But he was also something more. He was her soulmate, her other half, the one person in this strange, magical world who truly understood her. She squeezed his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. We'll face this together, she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. We'll find our own path, our own destiny. A sudden noise from downstairs startled them both. A crash, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Rhys's eyes narrowed, his body tensing. They're here, he whispered. The storm, it seemed, had fully arrived. Chapter 13. Flight through the whispering woods. Rhys moved with a speed that Sylvain could barely comprehend. He was out of the bed and across the room in an instant, grabbing a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace. He handed it to Sylvain, his golden eyes filled with a fierce urgency. Stay behind me, he commanded, his voice low and gravelly. And don't hesitate to use that. He led her out of the bedroom and down the grand staircase, his senses on high alert. The sounds of destruction were louder now, the crashing of furniture, the shattering of glass, the angry growls of werewolves. They reached the main hallway, just as a group of werewolves burst through the front door. They were large, imposing creatures, their fur mottled black and gray, their eyes burning with a savage intensity. They were led by a man Sylvain recognized, Elias, the hunter who had shot Rhys in the chapel. Elias's eyes, filled with a mixture of hatred and triumph, fixed on Sylvain. There she is, he shouted. Get her. The werewolves lunged, their claws extended, their teeth bared. Rhys roared, a sound that was both human and animal, and charged into the fray, meeting the attackers head-on. Sylvain, her heart pounding in her chest, raised the iron poker, ready to defend herself. But she was no match for these creatures, these supernatural beings with their incredible strength and speed. Rhys fought with a ferocity she had never seen before, his movements fluid and graceful, his strength seemingly limitless. He was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of silver and shadow, keeping the werewolves at bay, protecting her from their attacks. But there were too many of them. They surrounded him, their numbers overwhelming, their claws and teeth tearing at his flesh. Sylvain watched in horror, her mind screaming, desperate to help him. She remembered the power, the golden glow that had healed Rhys, the force that had knocked back the dark wolf in the clearing. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection she felt to Rhys, to the magic that flowed through her veins. She felt the familiar tingling sensation, the warmth spreading through her, building in intensity. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the werewolves attacking Rhys. She raised her hands, palms outstretched, channeling all her will, all her energy, towards the creatures. A wave of golden energy erupted from her hands, striking the werewolves with a force that sent them flying backwards. They yelped, their bodies convulsing, their eyes widening in surprise and pain. Rhys, momentarily freed from the attack, turned to look at Sylvain, his golden eyes filled with astonishment and gratitude. "Run, Sylvain," he shouted. "Get out of here. I'll hold them off." Sylvain hesitated. She didn't want to leave him, to abandon him to face this danger alone. But she knew he was right. She would only be a hindrance in this fight. She had to escape, to find help, to find a way to stop Elias and his pack. She turned and ran, fleeing through the manor, her footsteps echoing through the silent halls. She ran through the library, through the dining room, through a maze of corridors and chambers, desperate to find a way out. She reached a back door, bolted and locked. She fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking, her mind racing. She heard the sounds of pursuit behind her, the growls of the werewolves, the shouts of Elias. She finally managed to unlock the door, wrenching it open. She stumbled out into the night, into the cold, damp air of the whispering woods. She didn't stop running. She ran through the trees, her lungs burning, her legs aching, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, where she could find safety. She only knew that she had to escape, to survive, to find a way to help Rhys. She ran until she could run no more, collapsing at the base of a large oak tree, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked back at the manor, its dark silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. She could see the flickering flames of torches, hear the distant sounds of the battle raging within. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She felt utterly alone, lost and afraid. She had escaped the manor, but she was still trapped, caught in a web of ancient magic, of prophecy and betrayal. The woods around her seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't understand, to offer a solace she couldn't accept. The hunt, she knew, was far from over. It had led her out here, out into the unknown. Chapter 14. Sanctuary. In the lion's den, Sylvain huddled beneath the oak tree, shivering in the cold night air. The sounds of the battle at the manor had faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the whispering of the wind through the trees. She felt utterly alone, lost and afraid, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed her life. She knew she couldn't stay there, exposed and vulnerable. She had to find shelter, a place to hide, a place to plan her next move. But where could she go? She was a stranger in this land, surrounded by enemies, with no one to trust but herself and Rhys. The thought of Rhys, of his courage, his strength, his unwavering determination to protect her, gave her a flicker of hope, a spark of resolve. She had to find him. She had to help him. She stood up, her legs stiff and aching, her body bruised and battered. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. The moon, high in the sky, cast long, dancing shadows, making the familiar woods seem alien and menacing. She remembered the letter from her grandmother, the one that had brought her to Black Hollow. It had mentioned a hidden cabin, a sanctuary built by the Corvins generations ago, a place where they could escape persecution, where they could practice their magic in secret. Could the cabin still exist? Was it a viable option? She had nothing else, nowhere else to turn. She started walking, following a faint, overgrown path that seemed to lead deeper into the woods. She walked for what felt like hours, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, her senses on high alert. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and that lingering, indefinable wildness that she had come to associate with this place. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her body aching, her mind weary. She was about to give up, to collapse in exhaustion, when she saw it. A small, stone cabin, nestled among a cluster of ancient trees, its walls covered in ivy, its roof overgrown with moss. It was almost invisible, blending seamlessly with the surrounding woods, as if it were a part of the landscape itself. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The cabin looked deserted, abandoned, but she couldn't be sure. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dark and dusty, filled with cobwebs and the scent of decay. But it was also surprisingly intact. There was a small fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a few chairs, and a narrow bed covered in a thick layer of dust. Sylvain lit a candle she found on a shelf, the flickering flame casting a warm, inviting glow that pushed back the darkness. She examined the cabin more closely, her historian's eye noting the details, the craftsmanship, the age of the structure. This was indeed a place built by her ancestors, a refuge from a world that had feared and persecuted them. She found a few blankets stored in a chest, shaking off the dust and wrapping them around herself. She sat down by the fireplace, trying to warm herself, her mind still racing. She had found shelter, a temporary respite from the danger. But she was still alone, still trapped in this nightmare. She needed a plan, a way to fight back, a way to help Reese. She remembered the power, the golden glow that had emanated from her hands, the force that had knocked back the werewolves. She had used that power instinctively, without understanding it, without controlling it. Could she learn to harness it, to use it consciously, to defend herself and Reese? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, focusing on the connection she felt to Reese, to the magic that flowed through her veins. She felt the familiar tingling sensation, the warmth spreading through her, building in intensity. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on a small, wooden box sitting on the table. She raised her hand, palm outstretched, focusing all her will, all her energy on the box. She whispered a word that came to her unbidden, a word from the ancient language of the Corvins. Abraham. The box levitated, slowly rising into the air, hovering before her. Sylvain gasped, her eyes widening in surprise and wonder. She had done it. She had consciously used her power, had controlled the magic. A surge of confidence, of hope, flowed through her. She was not helpless. She was not alone. She had the power of her ancestors within her, the power to fight, the power to protect, the power to heal. Suddenly, a noise outside the cabin startled her. A twig snapping, the rustle of leaves. Someone was out there. Sylvain's heart pounded in her chest. She grabbed the iron poker she had carried from the manor, holding it tight. She extinguished the candle, plunging the cabin into darkness. She moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit woods. She saw a figure approaching the cabin, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't tell who. Friend or foe. Chapter 15. Betrayal's Bitter Sting. Sylvain gripped the poker tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. The figure drew closer, stepping into a patch of moonlight, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Reese. Relief washed over her, so intense it almost buckled her knees. She rushed to the door, throwing it open, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Reese, you're alive." He stepped inside, his golden eyes scanning her face, his expression grim. He was bruised and battered, his clothes torn and stained with blood, but he was alive. "Sylvain," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank the gods you're safe." She reached out to him, her hands touching his arms, feeling the solid warmth of his body beneath her fingertips. "I was so worried," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw them attacking you." He nodded, his gaze shifting away from hers. "It was close," he said. "But I managed to escape." "And Elias?" Sylvain asked. "The others?" "They're still out there," Rhys said. "Hunting us." He walked towards the fireplace, his movements stiff and weary. He sat down heavily on one of the chairs, his head in his hands. Sylvain followed him, kneeling beside him, her concern growing. "You're hurt," she said, noticing a deep gash on his arm, still bleeding sluggishly. "It's nothing," Rhys said, waving her concern away. "I've had worse." But Sylvain knew better. She remembered the soul bond, the way she had felt his pain, the way she had healed him before. She reached out and gently touched his arm, her fingers tracing the edges of the wound. "Let me help you," she said, her voice soft. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection she felt to Rhys, to the magic that flowed through her veins. She felt the familiar tingling sensation, the warmth spreading through her, building in intensity. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Rhys's wound. She placed her hands, still stained with his blood from their earlier encounter, over the injured area. She whispered the same word she had used before, the word that had come to her unbidden, the word from the ancient language of the Corvins. "Abraham." A faint golden glow emanated from her hands, a warm, pulsating light that seemed to seep into Rhys's wound. Sylvain felt a surge of energy drain from her, leaving her weak and dizzy, but she held on, her focus unwavering. Slowly, miraculously, the bleeding began to stop. The ragged edges of the wound started to knit together, the torn flesh mending itself before her very eyes. But this time, something was different. As she healed Rhys, she felt a strange resistance, a blockage, as if something were interfering with the flow of her magic. And she felt something else. A flicker of darkness, of deception. She pulled her hands back, startled, her eyes widening in confusion. She looked at Rhys, searching his face for an explanation. His golden eyes were different, colder, harder, devoid of the warmth and tenderness she had come to expect. A cruel smile played on his lips. "Thank you, Sylvain," he said, his voice smooth and silky, but laced with an undercurrent of malice. "That was most helpful." Sylvain felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't Rhys. This wasn't the man she had come to trust, the man she had cared for. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure before her chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. His form began to shift, to change, his features melting and reforming, his body growing larger, more imposing. Standing before her was no longer Rhys, but a man she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that burned with a cold, cruel light. He was dressed in fine clothes, a stark contrast to the rough-hewn cabin and the wildness of the surrounding woods. "You may call me Alaric," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "And you, my dear Sylvain, are the key to everything." He took a step forward, and Sylvain stumbled back, raising the poker defensively. It wouldn't be enough. She knew it wouldn't be enough. Alaric, she realized with chilling certainty, was Rhys's father, the leader of the rogue wolves. And he had used Rhys, used the soul bond itself, to deceive her. Chapter 16. The Heart's Silent Plea. Sylvain stared at Alaric, her mind reeling. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. He had used her connection to Rhys, the soul bond itself, to deceive her, to make her believe he was the man she cared for. The realization sent a wave of nausea through her, a bitter taste of violated trust. "How?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Alaric smiled, a cruel, predatory smile that sent shivers down her spine. "The soul bond is a powerful thing, my dear," he said. It allows for a sharing of sensations, of emotions, and with the right knowledge, of appearances. He took a step closer, and Sylvain instinctively raised the iron poker, her hands shaking. "Stay back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric chuckled, a low, guttural sound that echoed through the small cabin. "That won't be necessary," he said. "I'm not here to harm you, Sylvain. Not yet, at least. I'm here to offer you a choice." "A choice?" Sylvain repeated, her voice filled with suspicion. "What kind of choice?" "The prophecy," Alaric said, his blue eyes burning with an intense, fanatical light. "You have the power to fulfill it, Sylvain. To restore the balance, to unlock the full potential of the gateway." "By marrying Rhys?" Sylvain asked, her voice laced with bitterness. "By becoming your puppet?" Alaric shook his head. "Not by marrying Rhys," he said. "By marrying me." Sylvain stared at him, stunned.
"You?"
she repeated, her voice barely audible.
"But why?"
"The prophecy speaks of a union," Alaric explained. "A union between the Corvin bloodline and the leader of the werewolves. Rhys, he is weak, sentimental. He is not fit to lead, to wield the power that the prophecy promises. I am the true leader, the one destined to guide our people to a new era of dominance. And if I refuse?" Sylvain asked, her voice trembling, but filled with a growing defiance. Alaric's smile vanished, his blue eyes hardening. "Then you will be forced," he said. "And the consequences will be dire. Not just for you, but for Rhys as well. The soul bond, it cuts both ways, Sylvain. His life is in your hands." Sylvain felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was trapped, caught between a monster and the man she cared for, her choices limited, her freedom stolen. She looked at Alaric, her mind racing, searching for a way out, a way to fight back. She remembered the power, the golden glow that had emanated from her hands, the force that had knocked back the werewolves, the way she had levitated the box. She had to use that power to find a way to escape, to save Rhys. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, focusing on the connection she felt to Rhys, to the magic that flowed through her veins. She felt the familiar tingling sensation, the warmth spreading through her, building in intensity. But this time it was different. The soul bond, tainted by Alaric's deception, felt corrupted, distorted. She could feel Rhys's presence, his fear, his pain, but it was distant, muffled, as if he were trapped behind a thick wall. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Alaric. She raised her hands, palms outstretched, channeling all her will, all her energy, towards the man. "Get out," she commanded, her voice ringing out in the cabin, amplified by the power that surged through her. But nothing happened. No golden glow, no wave of energy, no force to push him back. Alaric just stood there, smiling, his blue eyes mocking her. "Your little tricks won't work on me, Sylvain," he said. "I am stronger than you, stronger than Rhys. I am the master of the soul bond now." He took a step closer, reaching out to grab her. Sylvain acted on pure instinct. She swung the poker. It connected with Alaric's head with a sickening thud. He staggered, momentarily stunned, but he did not fall. Instead, his eyes flashed, not golden, but a terrifying, icy blue. He backhanded her, hard. Sylvain flew across the room, landing in a crumpled heap. The world swam before her eyes. Alaric stood over her. He spoke, the words echoing, distorted. "You will be mine, Sylvain, one way or another." He bent to pick her up, and as he did, Sylvain, from the depths of her despair, silently, fiercely, desperately, pleaded. Not with words, but with her heart, with the soul bond. Rhys. Chapter 17. Reclaiming the Stolen Promise. The plea, raw and desperate, ripped through the corrupted connection of the soul bond, a beacon of pure intent cutting through Alaric's manipulative darkness. It resonated with a power Sylvain didn't know she possessed, a power born not of magic, but of love, of defiance, of the unyielding will to protect the one she cared for. Across the distance, in the cold, dark depths of the manor's dungeon where he was held captive, Rhys felt it. A surge of energy, of Sylvain's energy, jolted him awake. He had been drifting in and out of consciousness, his body weakened by his father's brutal attack, his spirit crushed by the knowledge of Sylvain's capture. He had felt the twisted mockery of the soul bond, the way Alaric had used it to deceive her, and the despair had almost consumed him. But now he felt her. He felt her fear, her desperation, but also her strength, her resolve. Her plea echoed in his mind, a silent scream that shattered the darkness, a lifeline that pulled him back from the brink. Rhys. He opened his eyes, his golden gaze focusing with a newfound clarity. He was weak, injured, but he was not broken. Sylvain needed him, and he would not fail her. He focused on the soul bond, on the connection to Sylvain, drawing strength from her plea, from her love. He felt the magic within him, the ancient power of his lineage, responding to her call. He pushed against his bonds, the chains that held him captive, testing their strength. They were strong, forged of iron, and imbued with magic to suppress his werewolf abilities. But the soul bond, it was stronger. He closed his eyes, channeling all his will, all his energy, all his love for Sylvain into the magic that flowed through his veins. He felt a surge of power, a golden glow that emanated from his body, pushing back the darkness, defying the suppression of his bonds. He roared, a sound that was both human and animal, a sound filled with rage and determination. The chains that bound him began to glow, to heat up, to melt. Back in the cabin, Alaric was reaching down to pick up Sylvain, his blue eyes filled with a triumphant gleam. He had her. He had won. But then he felt it. A tremor in the soul bond, a surge of power that made him stagger back, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. "What?" he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "What is happening?" Sylvain, still dazed from the blow, looked up at him, her vision blurring. She saw the confusion, the fear in his eyes, and she felt a flicker of hope. Something was happening. Rhys was fighting back. Suddenly, the cabin door burst open, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight, was Rhys. He was transformed, not fully but partially. His eyes were glowing with a fierce, golden light, his teeth elongated into fangs, his hands tipped with claws. He was a creature of both worlds, a being of immense power and fury. He roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the cabin, a sound that was directed at Alaric. The sound of a promise reclaimed. Alaric, momentarily stunned by Rhys's sudden appearance and the raw power emanating from him, stumbled backward, his eyes wide with fear. He raised his hands, trying to defend himself, but it was too late. Rhys lunged, his claws extended, his fangs bared. He attacked his father with a ferocity born of love and betrayal, of duty and desperation. The two men, father and son, locked in a brutal struggle, their bodies a whirlwind of motion and fury. Sylvain, with great effort, got to her feet and moved back, away from the fight. She watched as Rhys struck again and again, driving his father back. Alaric, despite his initial shock, began to fight back, drawing on his own dark magic, his own twisted power. But he was weakened, his control over the soul bond shattered by Rhys's defiance, by Sylvain's plea. Rhys, fueled by the power of the soul bond, by the love he felt for Sylvain, by the desperate need to protect her, was unstoppable. He landed a final, devastating blow, sending Alaric crashing to the floor, defeated. He stood over his father, his chest heaving, his golden eyes blazing. He was about to deliver the final blow, to end his father's reign of terror once and for all. But then he hesitated. Chapter 18. A Reckoning Under the Crimson Moon. Rhys hesitated, his claws inches from Alaric's throat. He looked down at his father, at the man who had betrayed him, who had sought to control him, who had threatened the woman he loved. Rage surged through him, a primal urge to kill, to end the threat once and for all. But then, he saw something in Alaric's eyes. Not fear, not defiance, but regret. A flicker of the man he had once been, the father he had once loved, before the darkness had consumed him. Rhys felt a conflict within him, a struggle between his duty, his rage, and his humanity. He was a werewolf, a creature of instinct, of primal urges. But he was also a man, capable of reason, of compassion, of forgiveness. He lowered his hand, his claws retracting, his golden eyes softening slightly. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill his own father, even after everything he had done. "Get out," he said, his voice a low growl. "Leave this place, and never come back. If I ever see you again, I won't hesitate." Alaric stared up at him, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and shame. He slowly got to his feet, his body bruised and battered, his spirit broken. He looked at Sylvain, a flicker of something that might have been apology in his eyes. Then he turned and fled, disappearing into the night. Rhys watched him go, his chest heaving, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the battle. He felt drained, exhausted, but also strangely relieved. He had made a choice that defied the prophecy, a choice that defied his own instincts. He had chosen mercy over vengeance, love over hate. He turned to Sylvain, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and concern. He shifted back, fully human now, his golden eyes returning to their normal warmth. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sylvain nodded, her eyes searching his face. I think so," she said. "But you let him go." Rhys sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I couldn't kill him," he said. "Not in cold blood. He's still my father, even after everything." Sylvain understood. She had seen the flicker of regret in Alaric's eyes, the hint of the man he had once been. She knew that Rhys had made a difficult choice, a choice that had cost him dearly. She reached out and gently touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice soft. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a deep gratitude. He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of love, of relief, of a shared ordeal survived. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more intense. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that reaffirmed their connection, a kiss that spoke of a future they would face together. But as they kissed, the moon above them began to change. It shifted from its silvery white to a deep, ominous crimson. A blood moon. Sylvain and Rhys pulled apart, startled, looking up at the sky. The crimson moon cast an eerie, unsettling light over the woods, bathing everything in a bloody glow. What does it mean?" Sylvain asked, her voice trembling. Rhys frowned, his golden eyes narrowed.
"I don't know," he said.
"But it's not a good sign. The blood moon is associated with powerful magic, with upheaval, with change." As they watched, the crimson moon seemed to pulse, to throb, as if it were a living thing. A wave of energy emanated from it, washing over them, making the air crackle with power. Sylvain felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her veins, a surge of energy that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. She looked at Rhys, her eyes widening in alarm. "The prophecy," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's happening, isn't it?" Rhys nodded, his expression grim. "The blood moon, it's a catalyst," he said. "It's accelerating the process, forcing the choice upon us." "But what choice?" Sylvain asked, her voice filled with fear and uncertainty. "We defied Alaric. We rejected the forced union. What else is there?" Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a deep, unsettling knowledge. "The prophecy, it's not just about a union between two people," he said. "It's about a union between two worlds. And the blood moon, it's opening a door, a gateway between our world and the other world." A sudden gust of wind swept through the woods, rustling the leaves, making the trees sway violently. The air grew cold, heavy with a strange, otherworldly scent. And then they saw it. A shimmering portal, a swirling vortex of light and shadow, opening up in the clearing before them. It was a gateway, a doorway to another realm, a realm of magic, of spirits, of unimaginable possibilities. The reckoning, it seemed, had arrived. Chapter 19. The Shattered Chains of Destiny. The portal shimmered and pulsed, a swirling vortex of iridescent colors and dark shadows, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. The air crackled with energy, a palpable sense of power that made Sylvain's skin prickle. She could feel the pull of the other world, a seductive whisper that promised both wonder and terror. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the mesmerizing spectacle before her. Rhys stood beside her, his hand gripping hers, his golden eyes reflecting the swirling colors of the portal. He was silent for a long moment, his mind racing, trying to understand the implications of this sudden development. "The prophecy spoke of a choice," he said finally, his voice low and grave. "A choice between balance and chaos, between harmony and destruction. But it didn't say what that choice was. It only said that you had the power to make it." Sylvain felt a wave of fear wash over her. She, a woman who had spent her life studying history, dissecting facts, seeking rational explanations, was now faced with a choice that defied logic, a choice that would determine the fate of two worlds. "But I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "What am I supposed to do? How can I possibly choose between two such abstract concepts?" Rhys squeezed her hand, his touch reassuring. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I believe in you, Sylvain. I trust your instincts, your heart. You have the power of the Corvins within you, the wisdom of your ancestors. You will know what to do." He looked at the portal, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "The blood moon, it's a catalyst," he said. "It's accelerating the process, forcing the choice upon us. But it's also a source of power. It's amplifying the magic, making the connection between the worlds stronger." He turned back to Sylvain, his gaze intense. "We have to go in," he said. "We have to face whatever awaits us on the other side. We have to find a way to close the gateway, to restore the balance." Sylvain hesitated. The thought of stepping into that swirling vortex, of entering a realm she didn't understand, a realm of magic and spirits, was terrifying. But she also knew that she couldn't stand idly by, that she couldn't let the prophecy, the machinations of Alaric, or the whims of fate dictate her life. She looked at Rhys, at the man she had come to love, the man who had stood by her, protected her, believed in her. She saw the strength in his eyes, the determination in his stance, the unwavering support he offered. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do it." Hand in hand, they approached the portal, the swirling colors drawing them closer, the otherworldly whispers beckoning them forward. They stepped through the threshold, leaving behind the familiar world of Black Hollow, entering a realm of unknown possibilities. The sensation was overwhelming. Sylvain felt a rush of energy, a tingling in her veins, a sense of disorientation and wonder. She found herself standing in a landscape that was both familiar and alien. It was a forest, much like the woods around Black Hollow, but the trees were taller, the leaves more vibrant, the air thicker with magic. The sky above was a swirling vortex of colors, mirroring the portal they had just stepped through. The moon, still crimson, hung low in the sky, casting an eerie, unsettling light. And then they saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows, ethereal beings of light and darkness, spirits of the other world. They were beautiful and terrifying, their forms shifting and changing, their eyes burning with an ancient wisdom. One figure, taller and more imposing than the others, stepped forward. It was a woman, her form shimmering with a golden light, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. She looked at Sylvain, her gaze piercing. "You have come," she said, her voice echoing through the clearing, a voice that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the otherworld. "The last of the Corvin line. The one who holds the power to choose." Sylvain felt a jolt of recognition. This woman, she was the woman from the mural, the woman who looked so much like her, the woman who was supposed to be Rhys's bride. Alara's ancestor. Who are you?" Sylvain asked, her voice trembling. The woman smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "I am Anya," she said. And I am here to guide you. Anya gestured, and with a sound like wind chimes, the other spirits drew closer, forming a circle around Sylvain and Rhys. Anya spoke again, her voice gaining strength. The choice, Sylvain Corvin, is not between two paths preordained. It is not between werewolf and human, or between two men. The choice is within you. The choice is to believe. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. Anya's words hung in the air, resonating with a power that Sylvain felt deep within her soul. The choice was not about external forces, about prophecies or destinies, but about her own internal belief, her own power to shape reality. Believe? Sylvain asked, her voice filled with confusion. Believe in what?
Anya svariled, Obentul, knowing svaril.
Believe in yourself, she said. Believe in the power of your love, in the strength of your connection to Rhys, in the wisdom of your ancestors. Believe in the possibility of balance, of harmony, of a future where the two worlds can coexist peacefully. Sylvain looked at Rhys, his golden eyes reflecting the swirling colors of the otherworld sky. She saw the love in his gaze, the trust, the unwavering support he offered. She felt the strength of their soul bond, the connection that had been tested, betrayed, but ultimately reaffirmed. She thought of her grandmother, Alara, who had chosen love over duty, who had broken the oath, but who had also paved the way for Sylvain to find her own path, her own destiny. She thought of Anya, the woman who had made the original pact, the woman who had sought to create a bridge between the worlds. She realized that the prophecy, the blood moon, the gateway, they were not forces to be feared, but opportunities to be embraced. They were challenges that had forced her to confront her own power, her own beliefs, her own capacity for love and forgiveness. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, centering herself. She felt the magic within her, the power of the Corvin bloodline, the connection to the otherworld, the strength of her soul bond with Rhys. It was no longer a chaotic, untamed force, but a part of her, a source of strength and wisdom. She opened her eyes, her gaze clear and determined. She looked at Anya, at the spirits of the otherworld, at the swirling colors of the sky. I believe, she said, her voice ringing out with a newfound confidence, a power that resonated with the very fabric of the otherworld. I believe in the possibility of balance, of harmony, of a future where the two worlds can coexist. I believe in the power of love, of forgiveness, of choice. I believe in myself. As she spoke, the crimson moon above began to shift, its color changing from a bloody red to a soft, silvery white. The swirling vortex of the sky calmed, the colors softening, blending into a peaceful, ethereal glow. The portal, the gateway between the worlds, began to shrink, to close, the swirling colors fading, the otherworldly whispers quieting. The spirits of the otherworld, their forms shimmering, nodded in approval, their eyes filled with a gentle, knowing light.
Anya svariled, a radiant, joyful svaril.
You have chosen wisely, Sylvain Corvin, she said. You have broken the chains of destiny. You have rewritten the prophecy. You have created your own future. She turned to Rhys, her gaze softening. And you, Rhys, son of Alaric, you have shown that even the darkest lineage can be overcome by the power of love and compassion. You have chosen mercy over vengeance, forgiveness over hate. You have earned your place as a guardian of the balance. Rhys bowed his head, his golden eyes filled with gratitude and relief. He had faced his demons, his father's legacy, and he had emerged victorious, not through brute force, but through the strength of his character, the depth of his love for Sylvain. The portal closed completely, the gateway between the worlds sealed, the balance restored. The other world returned to its own realm, leaving Sylvain and Rhys standing in the clearing, bathed in the soft, silvery light of the moon. They looked at each other, their hands intertwined, their hearts filled with a deep, abiding love. They had faced the ultimate test, the final confrontation of hearts, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, more deeply connected than ever before. They returned to the world they knew. They returned to Black Hallow. The curse was lifted, but the magic remained. Sylvain and Rhys, bound by a love that transcended worlds, were free to forge their own destiny, to create a future where the whispers of the past were not chains, but echoes of a love that had saved them both. They knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their hearts forever intertwined. Epilogue. Years passed. The scars of the past, both physical and emotional, faded, but the memories remained, a reminder of the trials they had overcome, the love that had sustained them. Black Hollow, once a place of shadows and secrets, became a sanctuary, a haven of peace and tranquility. Sylvain and Rhys, their hair now streaked with more silver, their faces etched with the lines of time and laughter, lived a life filled with quiet contentment. They had rebuilt the manor, restoring it to its former glory, but also transforming it into a home, a place of warmth and welcome. They had fostered a new understanding between the human and werewolf communities, bridging the gap that had separated them for generations. They had shared their knowledge, their magic, their love, creating a world where differences were celebrated, not feared. Lyra, Rhys's sister, became a frequent visitor, a bridge between the two worlds, a testament to the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. She had found her own place in the world, a leader among her people, a champion of the balance. Sylvain continued her historical research, but her focus had shifted. She no longer sought to dissect the past, to find rational explanations for every mystery. She embraced the magic, the wonder, the inexplicable beauty of the world around her. She wrote a new history, a history that acknowledged the power of myth, of legend, of the unseen forces that shape our lives. Rhys, freed from the burden of the prophecy, embraced his role as a guardian, a protector, a leader. He used his strength, his wisdom, his compassion to guide his people, to maintain the balance, to ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. They often walked hand in hand through the Whispering Woods, the same woods that had once held such fear and danger, now a place of peace and serenity. They would visit the ruined chapel, the place where their journey had begun, the place where they had faced their greatest challenges, the place where their love had been tested and ultimately affirmed. They would stand beneath the ancient oak tree, the tree that had witnessed the original pact, the tree that had become a symbol of their enduring love. They would look up at the moon, no longer crimson with a thread of prophecy, but a gentle, silvery orb, a silent witness to their enduring bond. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows over the land, Sylvain and Rhys sat on the porch of the manor, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Sylvain leaned her head on Rhys's shoulder, her hand resting on his, their fingers intertwined. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, her voice soft, "what would have happened if I hadn't found that letter, if I hadn't come to Black Hollow?" Rhys smiled, his golden eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. "Fate," he said, "has a way of bringing people together, Sylvain. We were always meant to find each other, to share this life, this love." Sylvain nodded, her heart filled with a profound sense of gratitude, of peace. She had come to Black Hollow seeking her family's past, but she had found so much more. She had found love, she had found purpose, she had found herself. She looked at Rhys, at the man who had captured her heart, the man who had shared her journey, the man who had become her soulmate. She knew that their love would endure, that their bond would transcend time and space, that their story would become a legend, whispered on the wind, carried by the stars, a testament to the power of love, of forgiveness, of choice. They sat there, in the quiet stillness of the evening, two souls intertwined, their hearts beating as one, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human and the werewolf spirit. The story of Sylvain and Rhys was a story of transformation, of redemption, of a love that had conquered all, a love that was truly moonbound.